All right, Coach Kelly, we are live. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's an honor and a privilege to have you join us, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks, Amber.
Yeah, so listen, we basically just passed the halfway mark in the year 2020, which has turned out to be one hell of a year for many reasons. And I saw an interesting thing the other day. If you could have one college football coach give you a halfway mark pep talk or speech, who would it be? And your name came up quite a bit. And so, I would love to hear just from your perspective at this halfway mark of 2020, how do you maintain your sense of motivation and focus even amid something like the pandemic that we're going through?
Well, there's such uncertainty. So, I think I'm used to being in a position of leadership where, you're trying to guide and lead people through, many times their first experience. And, for me too, right? We're building this plane as we're flying it. Nobody, I don't think, has had the experience of a pandemic, but so I try to rely on information that will get us facts, the science and things of that nature, and build it on protocol and procedures and lay that out for our players so it makes sense, it's rational. And so most of my time is really spent time, getting the facts, getting the information so it makes sense and it's logical, and over communicating that to our group. That's kind of how I've tried to operate my entire career.
Yeah, that's a good point. We talk a lot about within the football program and here, in Lippert as well, as this topic of control the controllables. And so in a situation like this, there's so much variability and so much ambiguity that it's like, you really have to direct your time, energy, and attention to those controllables, because otherwise the anxiety and the fear can just really get away with you.
Yeah, there's a time and place. I think it's great if you'd spend 10 or 15 minutes, just talking about, what could be. But I think most of the day really needs to be focused upon how do we have a great Wednesday? What's the most important thing to have a great Thursday or a great Friday, and stay in the moment. And it's okay to think about what might be, and it might even be okay to think about what's happened in the past, but it's really about staying in the moment and staying in the present, and how that can be most impactful to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Because if you start thinking about the future and what's out there, as you know, I'm getting hit with every day. Are you going to play? Are you going to play? Are you going to play? I can't predict that. What I can predict is how our guys train today and how they take care of themselves and follow the guidelines that we've put in place.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think, within that too, it's how do you sort of bracket this moment, right? And stay in this present season, knowing that this will pass, but this is the season that we're in right now. So we got to stay laser focused in it, and one day at a time, like you always say, of what's in front of us to control today and how do we get through it. I'm curious, how do you personally stay calm, cool, and collected in big moments, right? You've been in big games where there's a lot of pressure on the line, and you have to make decisions that are going to impact the outcome. Like, how do you personally maintain that sense of poise in those intense type of environments?
Well, first, this is my 30th year of being a head coach. So I have a reservoir of experience that I can go back to and say, well, I've been here before, I've done this before, and rely on that experience. For those that haven't had a lot of experience in those moments, I think it comes back to the preparation, and you've prepared yourself well for that. It's as simple as, how do you not freeze up taking that exam? Well, if you haven't prepared for the exam, you're probably not ready for the moment.
A little pit in your stomach, little anxiety.
And that's okay. I think you and I agree that it's okay to have that. That's really healthy. So I think if you haven't had a lot of the experience maybe that I've had, where I've had those experiences, then you really have to rely on your preparation. And having that total preparation allows you to go in with a confidence that allows you to stay out of the emotions of the moment. Because if you don't have that preparation or you don't have that experience, you will get caught up in the emotion.
Yeah, that's really good. You know, we're talking about, really broadly speaking, this concept of motivation, right? And the importance of a leader to motivate and lead their people well. But we talk a lot about how before you can lead others, you really got to lead yourself really well. And so I'd love to hear, I mean, you and I have a lot of these conversations, but I would love for everybody else listening to really hear the first question that you and I started on years ago, which is why do you do what you do? Like, what's your why and what motivates you, Coach Kelly?
Yeah, so you see the green screen behind me. I'm sitting in my office. It's not, it should not be in any way how I'm defined.
Yeah.
My office. You have to be out there amongst your
Mm,
players, and so my why is to be around my players. I do this because I want to help develop 18 to 21-year-olds be the best version of themselves. So
yeah.
what motivates me over 30 years is not being in a great office or playing the game of football as much as playing the game of life, and
Yeah.
having an opportunity to see the success of a Jalen Smith, and how well he's doing in our community and in our country outside of football. So my why is really about our young men and getting a chance to develop them on a day-to-day basis.
I think you said something really critical there too. I actually just had this conversation this morning with our senior operations vice presidents where he's like, we can't lead from our office. Like, we can't just sit in our office and send out reports and send out numbers and emails about all this stuff. Like, we got to be with our people. Like, that's where motivation happens, right? Because humans are wired for human connectivity. And when we isolate or try to lead in that way, we lose that passion side of it, right? Because people are both logical and emotional. And if we don't learn to tap into that emotional side of human beings, like, we lose out on, I think, like that little extra that takes teams from being good to great.
I agree with you. And I think comfort level in terms of what their environment is. Their
Mm,
environment is not to be in my office. They want to
yeah,
be where they're comfortable. Where are they most comfortable?
that's a good
The
point.
training room, their locker room. So meeting them in areas where they're not feeling that their defense mechanism is on display. They have to feel comfortable engaging and having conversation that's meaningful. And so finding those spots within our building, for me, I'm always going into the areas where they're comfortable to talk and have a meaningful conversation. Look, my office sometimes is the principal's office, right? You call you call somebody into my office, they're going to give you kind of some sound bites that are not going to be effective to getting to where you need to be. So being a roving leader and getting out and getting into the areas where is going to allow you to have that real meaningful conversation is important too.
Even just laced in your response to that, like, I hear your humility as a leader, right? It's not about you being in that power position to lead them and be their boss in any sort of way. It's about, how do I get the best out of them, right? Which goes back to your why. And if that's truly your why, then you put them in positions that help them be their best selves, and help get the best out of them in those moments. I think that's a powerful connection point there. Um, I'm curious, before we go into some of your strategies to motivate some of your players, like, what have maybe been some of the biggest lessons learned in your attempts to motivate either a staff member or an individual player, maybe highs and lows, a win or a fail, or something that you've learned through that?
Well, motivation is still about what kind of person is actually moved by motivation.
Mm,
Everybody's motivated differently, some intrinsically, some extrinsically. Tone of voice, all of those things matter when we talk about it. You and I talk about we're responsible for the engine, and having the understanding and recognizing that you are responsible for that engine, and how you motivate makes a difference. So it can't be cookie cutter.
yeah.
And so I don't believe that you're responsible as a great leader unless you know the person.
Yeah.
You better get to know them before you think you can motivate them. And that's where a lot of people make mistakes. Just by your title doesn't give you the right to mess with that engine. because you could do harm in your motivation. So I think the best advice that I would give is that motivation comes as a privilege, and it comes when you get to know the group that you're motivating, because different forms of motivation can work against you if you don't know who you're motivating.
That's powerful too, right? Because I think within that, what you're saying is all you can do is really create environments of motivation, but it's that internal drive that as our responsibility as leaders is to try to activate in other people, right? So it's not about us, it's about them. And you reference the engine of the car. So let's break that apart a little bit. You know, when we say car, we mean competence, autonomy, and relatedness, right? The three basic psychological needs that all human beings have, that when an environment supports those three things, it actually drives that intrinsic motivation. And if an environment tries to undermine any of those three, then that creates negative motivation in a person. And so maybe share a little bit about how you've incorporated that sort of theory, right? Because it's a theory. And how have we incorporated that into, or, you know, the Notre Dame football program, and what impact have you seen because of that?
Yeah. So, you know, when you're dealing with young men, in particular, the young men that are just coming into our program. And as I mentioned, I gave you a pretty clear vision of staying away from, you know, strong motivational talks until you get a feel for everybody. So with the young players, I want to put them in a position of success early on. So when we talk about competency, we want to see them have success. So we're going to ask them to do things that give them success, which will build confidence. And competency and confidence. Now we're motivating them, and we're giving them the opportunity now to maybe reach out a little bit more on their own to do things. And that's building, you know, competency and autonomy on their own. And that's motivation in itself. So we start very small. And I think some would say setting some easy expectations. So I think if you start really small, you then can start to work into some other modes that allow you to get to some motivational factors.
Yeah, it's really good. That just reminds me of the book, Whale Done by Ken Blanchard. I don't know if you ever read it. It's like that super thin one, right? It's like, how do you train a killer whale to jump over like a flaming hoop? You don't start with a flaming hoop. You know, you start with a bar under the water. And when he goes over it, you praise him. I mean, because what are you going to do? Beat a killer whale over the head with a stick? Like, I'm fairly certain you're going to be his next meal, if so. And so, you know, why do we try to do that to kids or to employees, thinking that that's going to allow them to jump over the flaming hoop? You know, you've got to give them something that they can accomplish, and then praise them, because praise to humans is like water to flowers and fish to killer whales, right?
No doubt.
It makes you want to do it more.
Now, look, there's always going to be some outliers. Kyle Hamilton, for example, was an extraordinary freshman that we brought in last year. He was an All-American. And, you know, typically what we do in strength and conditioning is we start with about 30% less volume for our freshmen in strength and conditioning than those players that are already in our program. It just makes sense, right? You know, we don't know where they're at from a physical conditioning standpoint compared to the guys that are in the program. Well, it took 2 days to figure out that Kyle Hamilton was not on the 30% less routine. So we immediately saw somebody that could handle more. And you'll have that too within your organization, that some are ready for, you know, more than just some competent acts, more than just, hey, you know, do these small things and have small gains. You'll see that, but there'll be outliers. The rest of the group, you'll gradually work them into it to get to that level.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, in general, how would you describe your leadership philosophy, like broadly speaking?
Well, I think it starts, you know, first and foremost as I think everyone needs to see that you're not perfect, and that you do make mistakes, and that you're accountable just like they are. Across the board. I think that we see today so many times where, you know, leadership is infallible and leadership can never make a mistake. I think if they see you that you are so similar to them in that respect, that there's a humbleness there that allows them to to really identify. You need to be identifiable, I think.
Yeah.
So the human piece is important. The second one, which I talked about a little bit earlier, I like to be a roving leader. I like to be out amongst our players, our staff, so they feel as though he's somebody that can be approached and is approachable.
Yeah.
Because this ability to lead has a lot to do with communication. And you're not going to get it just through emails. You're not going to get it just through, text messaging. So I think humble. I think someone that is approachable, and then I think somebody that has the core values that people will trust are those that people will follow.
So you mentioned communication there, and I think that I see this as a challenge with a lot of organizations in terms of how do they communicate effectively to everybody in the organization. What have you found as some of those modes of communication that allow the messaging that you set, that you determine, the vision, mission, values that you want to be ingrained in every aspect of the program? How do you communicate that effectively so that that gets down to every single person throughout whatever layer they're in your organization?
Well, I think it has to be visual too. I think that communication. I like to place it throughout the building. I like people to see it. So it doesn't have to be just communicated verbally every day. You can see signs. I look at Think Like a Champion today. I mean, I'm looking at it today. Those signs, and they are obviously very impactful. And I think that's important to make sure that that message resonates. And then making sure that your key staff are all on the same page and carrying the same messaging. Because look, that's how confusion reigns. When not everybody is communicating the same language and the same messaging on a day-to-day basis. Look, I've got 54 support staff members that we have to make sure that we are all on the same page. So we have weekly staff meetings that talk about our messaging on social media, as well as in our building, as well as what we say, all have to be aligned together.
Yeah. And that goes back to like that term that we talk a lot about, is that sort of comprehensive and integrated, right? So comprehensive, everything that touches these young men's lives and our staff's lives. And then integrated is it's all connected, right? The messaging, everything they see, all the language they hear, every experience, whether they're with the athletic trainer or with me or with the strength staff or with their position coach, like that needs to be mirroring, modeling the vision and mission and cultural identity that you want threaded throughout your very organization. So, for all those leaders listening out there, it's like everything within your team, your organization matters, because it's either building it up or it's tearing it down, right? So within that, right, like what else goes into when you're hiring a staff, let's say, aside from basic competency in their functional area, what else do you look for in individuals that you're bringing into this program now that you have it so like refined and on point?
Well, I think we talked about it a little bit. Like, why are they in this business? Is it for the paycheck? Is it they like to get paid? Are they wanting to coach at the Division I level? It's got to be centered around the student athlete and their development. So I want to know that their focus, their drive is about the development of the student athlete holistically. And that means here at Notre Dame, certainly we're talking about socially, helping them from that standpoint, spiritually, making sure that we're putting them in the right direction, certainly physically. They do play the game of football. And so all of those, the mental, the skill, all of those areas, they understand how important that is. And so that's job number one. I've got a sense that they are committed to that end. And then the ability to communicate effectively. So my one-on-one communication with them has to be such that I feel that they can deliver, on all of those things. If I feel like they're going to struggle delivering, They got to show me other ways that they would do that. And there are other ways than just word. They have to be able to do it in other fashions as well. But those would be the two keys for me.
That's awesome. So, right now in this season, I feel like everybody's got a new normal, right, that they're working within. And sometimes we're not competent in that, or we've got extra demands or pressures that we aren't necessarily used to. And as high performers, that can sometimes feel like you're just constantly failing, or you feel like you're failing a lot. The pandemic is a little bit of an extreme example, but in general, when you have a staff member or a student athlete who just feels like they're failing a lot, or they're not being as successful as they would want, like, how do you go about motivating them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're all going to have those times where we feel as though we're, not having a good run, if you will,
Yeah.
or, as a coach or a player, we're dropping the ball or we're not doing the things necessary. I think some of it sometimes could be, being introspective in a sense. Are you doing the things necessary to be successful? So we'll try to look at those things as
Mhm.
a staff member. Are you living your life the right way? Are you doing all the right things? Are there things at home that are affecting that? As a player, are you putting in the time? Are you locked in and concentrated? Once we've examined that, as you know, then sometimes this becomes a mental block that they need to get through. So I'll
Mhm.
try to bring them back to success that they have.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I had one coaching staff member who, we lost a couple of guys in recruiting, and he was talking about, boy, they're beating me up in this recruiting process. And I reminded him, I said, listen, you've been with me 5 years. These last 2 years at Notre Dame and 3 years prior at another institution. And you're 59-7 with me as one of my assistant coaches. There's nobody in the country that has that kind of success. So remember how successful you are. So I think sometimes after you've examined some of the more important elements as to why they may be struggling, which is
Mm.
important to do, you go back and you look at, remember these things that you've done that have put you in this position, because it might be just getting over it from that standpoint. And once I did that, it just changed his whole outlook and demeanor. And we're about to close on one of the top, offensive players in the country because, he just took a different approach to everything. So I think that those two things are important in changing one's perspective.
Yeah, you hit it, right? Perspective. We use that exercise all the time. It's like, hey, stand right in front of a wall and tell me what you can see. And it's like, the wall, but when you back up a little bit, now all of a sudden you can see all the decor on the wall, all of the trophies on the wall, right? All of the broader picture of what's going on, and how in this one moment you can't allow your emotions to derail the whole trajectory of the purpose of your life, And so getting yourself a better perspective, and as leaders, sometimes that's all it is, right? Asking your people some questions to shift their mindset a little bit so they can see things for what they really are. Because we say distraction's the enemy, and this is just distraction from the broader picture of your purpose here. And that can often reignite that motivation. And then I'm sure he's come at it like it was his first recruit out on the road again. And that's a good feeling.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
All right. Well, we are coming to a close here on our time together, Coach Kelly. I just want to open it up for any final thoughts in our sort of mid-year pep talk from the head coach in Notre Dame football. What would you say to us as a nation, as a world, and just as leaders right now in 2020?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good time, and we do this at halftime too. Is that it's important that the next quarter, we call it, it's really for us about effort and enthusiasm, and to have great effort and great enthusiasm going into the third quarter. You can't be stuck in one particular pattern. You have to keep your mind free. You have to be able to keep your eyes open to different things that might happen. And I worry sometimes that we become so polarized, so far to one side or the other. I'd advise everybody to change the channel once in a while and keep your eyes open and and stay enthusiastic, stay open, and really focus on being nimble and open-minded to whatever happens here in the next quarter, because I think we're going to have to be open-minded and stay optimistic. That's what I'm doing for football. People ask me all the time. I'm cautiously optimistic, and that's all you can be right now. Cautiously optimistic.
That's awesome. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed our time together. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your passion to impact these young men, but simultaneously to be example to all of us, right? Whether we're in sport or business or community leadership, or even just leading our families, as an example, right? That this can be done. We can do it where we're successful in terms of the outcome, while simultaneously being successful in the transformation of humans' lives. So thank you for that. I appreciate you. God bless you. And as always, go Irish.
Thanks, Doctor. Appreciate it.